Out of all of you guys, somebody will definitely remind you. All right, we got it. So it is recording now. Thank you very much. Honestly, please remind me. I could care less. You can remind me of the same thing 50 times. All right, let me share my screen. Well, I don't know why I can't remember that. All right, so you guys all can see Moodle here, right? So everyone, so I took a look at, I told you guys about the quiz, right? Remember, you can go back in, you can retake it, it will record your highest grade. It will only be available until 11:59 p.m. though, okay? So just know that's the sort of limit there. So that's why that's showing as open again, just in case somebody came on a little bit late. So that's the story with that. If you're fine with your grade, you don't need to go in there again, but it's just there in case you want to improve your grade, okay? In terms of the scientific method activity, most people handed that in. I did go in, I have to grade them, but I did go in and kind of add comments. You should be able to see those comments. I think, I don't know if it gives you a notification about that or if you actually have to go into the assignment to see my comments, okay? So I'm just making you aware of that. And only the comments are about the file types. So I think every single one of them I could see. I just sort of warned those people that like submitted things through Pages or like Google Docs, or it shows up like as an RTF file, to try to use a Word or a PDF file, please, moving forward. It just creates a whole lot less confusion and me having to go back and forth to tell you, can you resubmit this and what have you, okay? So, and remember that IT, there is a help desk that can help you with any of those technical issues, including downloading the free version of Microsoft Office that's available to you, okay? And also getting a laptop, because everyone's entitled to a laptop, okay? So make sure if you're having issues with that, to contact IT or call the help desk, or put in you can go online and you can put in a request, a help desk request, okay? If you got one other thing I just wanted to show you too, for lab, right? When we're meeting virtually for lab, it's here, okay? So just don't click on the class meeting, make sure you click on the lab meeting. So those of you in Thursday lab, or anyone who missed Tuesday lab for whatever reason, please log on at 2 p.m. to the virtual lab meetings, okay? I introduce and explain the first lab assignment, which is here, which is just on metric conversions, okay? The next lab for next week is metric conversions, kind of again, and it's just a more involved lab, and there's a video of me doing it, and then you guys are going to complete the assignment. So there's more metric conversions in there, and there's also like parts of the microscope and how to use the microscope. So when you guys then come in for that live lab the week of the 14th, what we will be doing is using the microscope. We'll probably make some slides, like you can do a cheek cell slide, and things like that, okay? So you can't learn how to use the microscope without actually using the microscope. So that's what that is. And then you'll see though, the week of the 14th, there's still gonna be a lab assignment. And again, I'll make sure that's clear to everyone. That's gonna be due, okay? So what we're doing live is different than what's here. Everyone, no matter what, is still gonna be completing these lab assignments that are online, okay? And again, remember, I'll remind you of that. So right now we're only worrying about this metric system assignment, okay? And again, I explained that on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. I'll do that again today at 2 p.m. Does anyone have any questions along those lines or having to do with lab?
Yeah, I have a question. So when we go for that metric conversion practice that you have, it shows, well, on my end, I don't know if anyone else has checked it out, but it shows me the same thing for the metric system lab assignment and the metric conversion practice. It shows me both the same PDF.
Yeah, it is. So that's just because that's just the PDF if you just want to access it. But in here, correct, it's the same PDF, but you have to complete that second page. So
so we submit it there?
Correct. The reason why it's an assignment is because that's the only place you can submit it. So I to be honest, I don't have to have it in two places, but this is just kind of like if you just want to reference the PDF, it's there. But to submit it, it's actually here where that blue arrow is. Yeah, but you're right. It's the same document that's in both places. Anyone have any other questions?
So today is gonna be the where you go over the metric thing for our day lab, or no?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And like I said, I am going to record it. If I don't hit record at 2 p.m. today, please remind me, because I think it's important for that to be recorded, because again, some people find the conversions a little confusing and don't have a lot of exposure to that, okay? So please remind me. Any other questions? All right. Okay, so that's that kind of, again, for lab, because we're kind of starting to get into the lab. So the labs, you know, are meant to be are meant to supplement the lecture, but, you know, they're not the same thing, right? They're kind of, they're different hands-on type of activities that sort of reinforce the material, okay? So know that it's all of these things that are here in lab on Moodle, everyone is going to be doing those, okay? But again, don't go ahead, wait until I tell you about the lab and what you need to do and introduce it and explain it before you go and do the assignment, okay? All right, so for lecture, right, and for where we're at right now, we're chapter 2, right? Chapter 2 is the chapter we're covering this week. Remember, again, that recorded lecture is there. Somebody asked about the review packet, so I wanted to actually show you this as well. So again, the assignment for chapters 1 and 2 was due today. We're going to go over that because that's a way of reviewing those chapters, okay? I also was probably going to pull up this chapter 2 review packet to show you what's in there, and also maybe use some of those questions again for further review, okay? So let me just show you that now, just so you know what that is, and in case we don't really get to it. Also, a reminder that when you're listening to the recorded lectures, we should have the, I should have put the review sheet. I thought I put that there. I'll duplicate that. So this exam 1 review sheet, we should have that open. Remember, we had opened that up kind of first class or second class, and we're gonna write notes on there. I'll probably pull that up. Let me just download that right now and show you. I think I kind of told you guys I was gonna ask you to maybe share what you have so far with that, okay? So let's sort of leave that towards the end. If you notice here, I put up another assignment, or this was already here, but I just wanted to remind you of it. This is, once your review sheet for chapters 1 through 4 is completed with all your notes in it, right? You're gonna hand that in, okay? So that's actually gonna be due, oh, that's not next week. It's the week after, okay? So it's, because each time we're going through a chapter, we should be adding our notes into that review sheet, okay? So it's kind of like an ongoing thing that you then will be handing in that week before we're gonna take the exam, okay? So exam is scheduled for Tuesday, September 22nd, okay, at 12:30. Remember, everyone's gonna log in at the same time and take that exam on Moodle, all right, guys? You will have a quiz next Tuesday as well, right? So quiz on chapters 1 and 2, Tuesday at the beginning of class. So if you look in any given week, I always try to summarize what we're doing, remind you if there's a quiz or anything there, okay? So that will be our next class meeting on Tuesday. As soon as we get on, you guys are all gonna get on Moodle and you're gonna take the quiz, okay? And then we'll go over that quiz together. So again, there's another review of chapters 1 and 2. So you need to make sure that you're really caught up, you know, up to through chapter 2 this week, okay? Because then we're moving on to chapter 3 right after that. Any questions, guys?
I have a question. So the metric system lab assignment is due tomorrow?
It is.
Okay.
What I'm gonna do for all of your lab assignments, usually I give you a week or so to do it. This one, it's a shorter assignment and I want you guys to have that done before you move into next week. So everyone's lab assignments though, whatever week they're due, will be due Friday, like Friday by like 11:59 p.m. So just so that I have it as a standard due date, all right? But again, it'll be that following week. So it's not like you're gonna do the lab on Thursday, or I'll introduce it on Thursday and then it's due that Friday. It will be due the following Friday, okay?
But the lab assignment is for tomorrow, right?
Yeah, but you're correct, with the exception of this assignment. This assignment is due tomorrow, even for you guys that are starting it today, because it's super short.
It's the second page, right?
Yep. It's the
Oh.
second. Yep. I'll explain all that on Thursday, you know, at 2 o'clock today, sorry. All right, any other questions, guys? Okay, so let me, let's go over the homework assignment, okay? So we're going to pull up this homework assignment. And again, this is something that you can do with the group tutor, right? And so you know what, let me also download, I'm going to download the chapter 1 lecture too, so that I can kind of refer back to the slides that correspond to the questions, okay? If something needs further clarification. So let me just get that so that that's ready. 1 second. Oops, I should have went all the way back.
Did the group tutor started already or no?
Yes, I sent you guys an email about that. Started this week. So there's group tutoring tonight at 7:30. 7:30 to 9:30. You can pretty much, log in kind of anytime in between that, as long as you're spending like at least a half an hour or 45 minutes.
So the group tutoring, okay, I got to see that yesterday. I thought the group tutoring was like during the lab.
No.
So I got to see that last night. So you said we have to be on one of those tutoring sections at least once a week?
Yep.
Well, I haven't been on none of these 2 weeks.
Well, it just started this week and today's Thursday. It's at 7:30 tonight.
Okay.
Okay. So make sure you guys are attending at least one per week. Again, it doesn't mean you have to sit there for the whole 2 hours, but it's meant to be helpful, right? So do your best to get in there. Tuesday, Thursday, 7:30 to 9:30. The link for the group tutoring is on the Moodle page. Right here. Okay. All right. So let me go back and just download that chapter 1, just so I have that ready. Okay, guys. So we're going to go over the homework. And then again, that allows us to review. I'll probably do a little more review of chapter 2 as well. And so please ask questions, okay? So that I can then clarify. If you have a question, likely somebody else also probably would like to review that as well, right? So let's go back. For the scientific method activity, we're not going to spend any more time with that. We spent a lot of time with that, okay? So we'll we can move past that. Like I said, I'll put a grade actually in for your guys' assignments for that too. Okay, so the first question, again, the homework questions are very straightforward and they're meant to be answered from the book, from the PowerPoint, not from Google. Again, I can clearly see if it's copy and pasted from Google, Turnitin, we'll pick that up. So I already forewarned you guys about that, and that doesn't help you any, obviously. So the whole point is it makes you go back to that lecture or back to your notes, right? Or back to the book just to review, okay? So for number 1, right, it says, what are the common characteristics of life? So that was kind of the first part of chapter 1. So let's name some of these. Actually, what we could do, how do we want to do this? Oh, you know what you could do? I just learned this. So here's what we can do. We can list them, but why don't you guys try this? So if you go up to the top of your screen, you'll see a thing where there's like a little pen thing or it says annotate. You actually can then write on the screen here. So somebody write down one of the characteristics of life, like over here. See how it works. Yeah, see, there you go. It's not easy to write with that thing though. Go ahead, keep going. Living organisms. Okay, are organized. Thank you. Now erase that for me. There's a little eraser tool. I also just want to try these things out, right? Okay, cool. So it works out well. You can also do it as a text box too and write it in. All right, so living organisms are organized. What's another one? Guys, you don't have to write it, say it.
Life requires material and energy.
Good. Life requires materials and energy. Somebody else, another one.
Production.
Go ahead.
Production, yeah.
Development.
Okay.
Adapting to the
Reproduction.
environment.
Yeah, adaptations. Okay.
Reproduction.
Respond to stimuli.
Okay, good.
Homeostasis.
Who was it? Say that louder.
Maintain.
Homeostasis. Did we list that?
Reproduce and develop.
Yeah.
Develop. Yep.
Material and energy. Yeah.
don't think so. Yeah, right. So again, this is coming right from the beginning of the chapter. Most of these you probably could come up with on your own if I just asked you to think about things, right? And sort of basic characteristics of life. So living things are organized. We talked about the levels of biological organization. Okay, so remember those. We went through those before, right? Going from atoms, right, to molecules, and then we're going up in size and up in complexity until we get all the way up to ecosystem. All right. If we move, and then all the way up to biosphere. I forgot biosphere. Life requires materials and energy, right? Okay. Some terms that are thrown in here, the term metabolism. A lot of times, I guess I kind of will ask you guys, all right, well, like, how would you define metabolism, right? Like if I just ask you and you don't see what is written here, it says all the chemical reactions that occur in the cell. What do you guys usually think of in terms of like a definition of metabolism?
The way
The pace of
how fast you digest.
Sorry, yeah, I know. It's hard for me to see who's
The
sorry.
pace.
it's the pace of the way.
Go ahead.
The pace of how.
How
I
you
don't know
break
the pace of how you eat, like
I would say
where
the
it
pace to get
goes, how it
your
The
goes.
pace that your body breaks down
Yeah,
food.
Food. Yeah.
We usually say things like, oh, you have a fast metabolism or a slow metabolism, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like that. Okay. So yeah, that's usually kind of what we kind of think of it as, this kind of like larger scale, right? When we think about metabolism here in biology, we're going to think about the chemical reactions that occur inside the cell. And obviously, all of those chemical reactions that are occurring inside the cell are what are breaking down your food, right? But we have to kind of think about it on that scale, I guess. Okay. So for our purposes, if we talk about defining metabolism, we're talking about all the chemical reactions that are going to occur in the cell. And when we get to chapter 3, we will start talking about some of those reactions, those chemical reactions in general. Okay. If you take biochemistry, you will talk a lot about those chemical reactions, right? And get into a lot more specifics about those chemical reactions, okay? So we wanna kind of think of it that way. You know, one of the other things that this sort of characteristic of life brings up to is sort of the relationship, right? Sort of between the sun and then all of the other sort of living organisms on Earth, right? And so if you look at this, picture here, right, in this sort of flow of energy, that's sort of what I'm referring to, right? So like something, you know, I guess we should understand what this means. And I think I brought this up another time at the beginning of one of our other lectures, right? I kind of asked you guys about decomposers, right? So I'll ask you now up here, when we're showing this solar energy sort of going into the producers here, what are we kind of representing here? What's going on there?
At the top.
Yeah, at the top here. So this solar energy going to the producers, explain that a little more. What's actually kind of happening here?
Plants use the solar energy for their production of foods.
Yes, very
Like
good.
the process of photosynthesis.
Yep. Photosynthesis. Go ahead. Who else is that? Vanessa?
Yeah.
Go ahead. You want to add to that?
Oh yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say what he said, photosynthesis and.
Good. Photosynthesis, right? And so when we talk about producers, these are organisms that have the ability to produce their own food, right? So they essentially capture that solar energy, convert that solar energy into usable energy, and then use that to produce their own food, right? And then we talk about consumers. What are consumers?
Us, the animals.
Yeah. There you go. Us, other animals that aren't able to produce their own food, right? We have to basically acquire or ingest our food. Okay, so you guys can see kind of how the relationship here. The other thing is it's showing you kind of energy transfer. That's what this sort of red is. And you can always see that, you know, energy is never really, it never can be created or sort of, it can be sort of lost in the form of heat, but it never just goes away, right? It changes forms. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later on as well, okay? But this is really about kind of understanding this sort of relationship and this sort of flow of energy, right? And the idea that all living things are going to require, right? It says materials and energy. So that picture is kind of showing you both of those things. All right, so living things maintain homeostasis. That was another one. I think somebody mentioned that one. And so we should understand what homeostasis means. I guess, can somebody give an example of something that you think about when you think about homeostasis, or something that's sort of regulated in that way in our body?
Temperature, body temperature.
Body temperature. Okay, somebody else. That's usually the first one that somebody says. Exactly, body temperature. What else?
Insulin.
Hormones. Oh.
Hormones, and somebody said insulin. So
Sugar.
Insulin, yep. Yeah. I mean, anything.
Blood level.
I don't know, but the first thing
Blood pressure.
that came into
pressure.
it was heartbeat. I don't know if that's correct, but that
Yeah.
was something I thought
Heart rate
about.
has to be maintained at a certain rate. If it increases or decreases, there are mechanisms placed to bring it back. I mean, there are also physiological reasons why you would want heart rate to increase, right? But if you're talking about kind of just it maintaining its homeostatic level, yeah, all these things are.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What about labor?
Say it again.
Labor.
Yeah, so labor is kind of something, when you think about like contractions that are generated via labor, you think about positive feedback mechanisms, right? And so in that case, it's good to get away from homeostatic levels, right? So if you sort of have, so the idea is usually if you talk about control of homeostasis, right? If you think about body temperature, if body temperature raises, there are feedback mechanisms, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on too, called negative feedback that will bring it back to where it was, right? But in things like labor, once a contraction occurs and those attractions, now we can kind of think of those contractions as being moving away from the, the sort of steady state, more and more will start occurring because there are mechanisms in place called positive feedback that will bring it back or bring it further away from its normal levels. So yeah, that's a good point, and that does relate to homeostasis, and particularly relates to things, relates to positive feedback versus negative feedback. So whenever we think about things being maintained at their homeostatic state, there are, we call them negative feedback mechanisms that keep them at that state. So same thing with hormones, or if you think about insulin specifically, if levels of insulin are getting too high, there are mechanisms that are put in place, negative feedback mechanisms, to bring it back to its normal levels. Yeah, we'll talk more about that a little bit later on in the semester.
Thank you.
Yep. Other questions? All right, so if we're talking about living organisms responding to stimuli, somebody said that one too. Super important, right? If you as an organism aren't able to respond to stimuli, you're not going to last very long, right? What systems are particularly important in responding to stimuli? What system of the body would you think of?
Sight.
Think about a system though, body system.
Muscle system.
Okay. Nervous system?
Nervous system.
Yeah. Yep. But I think you can think about muscular system, I guess, as well. And obviously nervous system, muscular system are pretty tightly controlled. So there's a stimuli that might come in that then creates a response, like a movement response, that's going to obviously kind of tie together the nervous system and the muscular system. All right, cool. All right, living organisms reproduce and develop. Obviously, we probably can understand why if you can't reproduce and develop, you're not going to be a very successful, right? And then I think we already talked about this too. Adaptations, right, is one of the other characteristics. Is that the last one? There's 6. Yeah. All right, let's check out the next question. Oh, we already did this too. Describe the levels of biological organization. That means going from atoms, right, molecules, cells, and keep moving up all the way up into biosphere. I know we had reviewed that and I kind of just quickly touched on it. Does anyone have more questions about that, or think they sort of require further clarification on that? Okay, I think that's pretty straightforward. All right. Number 3 says, how does natural selection result in adaptation to the environment? So this kind of requires, a little bit of you trying to explain that in your own words. So why doesn't somebody share what they put down for this question?
For me, I put if an organism is going to survive, it has to adapt to the environment.
Okay. So where's the natural selection part of it, I guess?
So natural selection is like the strongest organisms survive and like the weak die, I guess.
Well, right. That's sort of the survival of the fittest, right? But where does the natural part, I guess, come in? What do we mean by that?
Organisms that are most suited for that environment.
Okay. So I guess the natural part of it is kind of corresponding to the environment. But again, and remember, it's the idea that the environment, right, is selecting for those individuals that are most fit, right? But you got to kind of consider the adaptation part too here, right? So go ahead.
By the natural selection part, like I mentioned, their body and metabolism needs to evolve and create a gradual change to survive in any environment.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, so the idea is that those, the environment will create, right, the changes that are creating the environment, there'll be certain organisms that then, right, develop mechanisms to be better suited for that environment, right? And those are called adaptations, okay? And so it's right. It's the idea that only those animals or those organisms that have those adaptations that make them better suited are going to be the ones that survive, right? So there's kind of a bunch of ways you can sort of explain that. I guess I'm just kind of looking for kind of in your own words how you're going to relate those terms.
Didn't that happen with some bird on some island?
Yeah, if you talk about the finches on the Galapagos Islands, yeah, we talk about that next semester. Darwin observed a lot of those changes, right? So remember, we're just kind of introducing these concepts because they're sort of basic concepts of biology, but we kind of get into a lot more detail about these concepts at the end of the semester, moving into next semester. But yes, that's true. All right, so anyway, this is a little more information on this. Remember, I think I mentioned this too, that when we think about mutations, right, or genetic changes, right, remember that those are not created by the environment. Those are just random changes that are there first, right? And then those animals or those organisms that have the most appropriate genetic change that makes them well adapted for the environment are going to be the ones that survive, okay? So again, just understanding those basic concepts, we get into a lot more detail at the end of the semester, okay? This part, remember, things to kind of take away from this, the three main domains are what? They're here somewhere. What are the three main? Yep, bacteria. What's another?
Angie?
Bacteria, archaea,
and eukarya. You're I don't know how to say it. Eukarya. Yeah.
Right? Those are the three main domains, okay? Meaning those are the three largest groups to which all living organisms fit under. Then you break down those larger groups from there, right? So if you talk about bacteria, what kind of organisms are in that domain? It's pretty self-explanatory. Bacteria, right? Which are prokaryotes, okay? Archaea, these are also prokaryotic cells. These are different than bacteria though, but we don't talk about them that much. And we'll talk about them kind of more again at the end of the semester, but we don't talk about them that much because they don't really impact us as much as bacteria do.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I mean, from what I understand, archaea existed in a more, what do they call it, complex environments? Like,
yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so correct. Archaea are prokaryotic cells, right? Organisms, single-celled organisms that really live in these extreme environments. Environments like high salt environments, like the Great Salt Lake, really hot environments. So so again, they don't live in our bodies, right? So and they don't like cause disease or anything like that. So we don't really hear about them as much, okay? But they are different than bacteria. That's why they're in a separate domain. At one point, we kind of thought that they were more related to bacteria, but they've been separated out because they're different. But yes, that's true. So if you guys look in those couple slides from where I was, there's a little description about, you know, these 3 domains. Okay, so remember that archaea and bacteria, those are prokaryotes. Okay. And then if you go back, let's go back here. If you go back to domain eukarya here, this domain now is going to be further broken down. And this is the domain that we focus mostly on. When we talk about eukarya, we talk about eukaryotes, right? So and we'll talk more about the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes in chapter 4 as we move along. But this gets further divided, right, into these kingdoms here. And then these kingdoms are further divided, right? So what we're looking at is a phylogenetic tree, and we're looking at the different taxonomic groups that exist, right? And remember, we should be familiar with this level of classification, right? We talked about domains. I just showed you some different kingdoms, and then those kingdoms will be broken down further in this way here. Okay. Any questions about any of that, guys?
So, any organism from how do you say it? Eukarya?
Eukarya, yeah, you got it.
Area is a eukaryote.
Eukaryote.
Right?
Yeah,
A eukaryote. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so I mean, this is really super simple here, right? If we talk about a prokaryote versus a eukaryote, prokaryotes do not have a membrane-bound nucleus. They're also much more simple. They lack other membrane-bound organelles as well. But like I said, we really get into the differences between these when we move on to chapter 4, okay? So right now, kind of just take this as super simple. Eukaryotes have a membrane-bound nucleus. Prokaryotes do not, okay? And know that eukaryotic cells or eukaryotes are more complex than prokaryotes, okay? So like if you think about a prokaryote, probably most likely you think about bacteria. That's the sort of most common and what we usually associate with prokaryote. Any other questions? Okay. Then remember the last part of the chapter talked about the scientific method. So we went through, we did that scientific method activity. We kind of talked about that kind of, I also kind of showed you that maybe I might ask you about like some data or a graph or something like that. So, you know, you also can review that. We should know, you know, what the scientific method is. And we should kind of know the difference between these 5 steps here. Also, I told you that on the exam, I could ask you in an essay question to like, you know, develop a hypothesis or something similar to like that activity that we did, just to kind of see how you're interpreting or thinking about it. Again, I could also show you some data from an experiment and ask you about that data or something like that. Okay, but again, it's on a very basic level. Okay, but like, you know, we should know the difference between an observation and a prediction in experiments, right? Some of this, again, is kind of self-explanatory. Don't worry about this figure. I think I told you guys that already. I think it gets a little confusing, right? But I basically break down, you know, observation versus hypothesis. And again, you guys kind of did that on your own too in that scientific method activity that we did. Okay. Any questions about anything related to this part of the chapter? Right, remember, I know somebody was asking about kind of, we were talking a little bit about like independent variable and dependent variable, right? So, or experimental variable. Remember, that's always what you're sort of measuring, is that, or what's changing is that is the dependent variable. But when you're looking, it says here, you're examining the contribution of a specific factor, right? So remember, we kind of talked about, well, maybe you have a group of animals that had a traumatic brain injury versus ones that did not. Your independent variable is the injury, the traumatic brain injury, right? And then you're going to look at some other dependent variable that might change because of the injury, right? If that kind of helps.
So like if their blood pressure like all of a sudden like goes up all the time, that would be the other one, the other variable?
Correct. That would be the dependent variable. That would be what's changing, right? Okay. And then we kind of, yeah. So then if you think about it along this line too, like the test group would be the traumatic brain injury group. The control group is the one that didn't have an injury, right? And so we talked about, remember we talked about like placebo. That was one of the examples that we gave here. If you look at this one example that the book gives about the antibiotic, remember that? I got to make this bigger to say, okay? So we did, I know we went over this, so I don't want to keep harping on it. Let me get rid of, why does that do that? It's so annoying. All right, let me shrink that. I don't know why that does that. Okay, sorry. Let's go back here, right? So remember so in this case, there's actually 2 test groups, right? Because you have antibiotic A and antibiotic B. And remember we talked about this control group and they're receiving a placebo. And we kind of talked about, well, why do you need to give them the placebo and what does that mean? Does anyone have questions about that? I think I know we went over that. So if you weren't in class on Tuesday, I believe we went over on Tuesday, listen to the recording if you feel like you need a little bit more explanation there. All right, so now I want to look at our chapter 2 questions here. So chapter 2, remember, is our sort of basic chemistry chapter. So question number 1 asks you, what is an isotope? And then specifically asks, what is a radioactive isotope? And asks you about 2 uses of radioactivity in science or medicine. So why doesn't one person tell me what is an isotope? Would you write down?
For me, I put isotopes are atoms of the same element, but have different atomic masses.
Good. Okay. So they're the atoms of the isotopes are atoms of the same element, right? That differ in the number of neutrons, and therefore they differ in their number of atomic masses. And so you can see down here examples of carbon isotopes, right? So we have carbon 14 here, carbon 13, and carbon 12. Okay. All right. So what about radioactive isotopes?
From what I said about radioactive isotopes, I said that they are atoms that give off energy in the form of rays and subatomic particles.
Yeah. So they spontaneously decay and they give off energy, right? Okay. And so it says here they can be helpful or harmful, right? A lot of times we probably think of radioactive or radioactivity as being harmful. But in actuality, it's very helpful in science and medicine. And so I gave some examples as to how we can use radioactivity in science and medicine. So what did you guys, somebody else who hasn't said anything, what'd you write down for uses of isotopes in science or medicine?
I put the PET scan of the brain,
okay,
which in indicating activity.
Okay, good. PET scan of the brain, right? This is showing you this here. Essentially, what happens in a PET scan, right? There's a tracer. Basically, you radioactively label glucose, you inject it into the patient, and then you put them into a scan, right? And what we'll show you is levels of activity, because brain areas that are going to be highly active will take up more of that radioactive glucose, right? Those that are less active, you'll see less. And so it could pick up like deficits due to a stroke or something like that, where like you have loss of activity in a brain region due to, loss of blood flow or something like that. All right, good. What's another one?
Professor?
Yeah.
I have cancer. Is that one of, can that be one of them?
Well, in particularly how? So how do we use radiation in relationship to cancer?
So like
radiation therapy.
Yeah. So like,
or chemotherapy.
Yeah. So who was that?
I have radiotherapy.
Or chemotherapy.
That's not radiation, right? So who was asking the initial question?
Hira.
Go ahead. Hira, continue what you were saying. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I just wanted to ask if that's okay, because I had that as like one of the answers.
Yeah, you would need to elaborate a little bit more on that, right? In terms of, right, if we're talking about cancer, we're specifically actually talking about high levels of radiation, right? Showing you radiation therapy. And that's different than chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is a drug that you're taking either IV or by mouth, right? It's a molecule, it's a chemical. Here, these are radiation, right? Radioactive waves that are concentrated on a specific area. Here, they're showing you a specific area of the brain that will then kill off any rapidly dividing cell. So for the most part, in the brain, most cells are not rapidly dividing. So only the ones that it would be killing are those rapidly dividing cancer cells. But so yes, it's used in the treatment of cancer for radiation treatment. So just remember that chemotherapy is different than radiation, right?
Use radiation to shrink tumors, right?
Correct. So it's going to kill any of those rapidly dividing cells that would be part of that tumor. But it's focused, right? You can't like subject your whole body to these high levels of radiation. It has to be focused on where that tumor is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Anything else? Anyone else added here? There's some peaches here. Why does it show that? Kind of disturbing. What do you use radiation here with the peaches? Why is it showing that?
To age them.
No, well, the opposite of that, right? If
Anything decomposing them?
To like destroy bacteria.
Go ahead. Who was? Sorry, we got a couple people.
So the first picture of the peach is the first one on top where they all damaged.
Yeah, so they're moldy and spoiled, right? Whereas these guys aren't. So you can use radiation basically to kill off bacteria or fungi that might be on the surface there that will lead to that decomposition of the peach and the spoilage.
Yeah, but they're missing like a little bit, like on top, like a little bit of the peach. Like
yeah, it's just I don't know.
Somebody took a bite.
Maybe. Hopefully before it was moldy, right? No, but what they're showing you there is that by exposing them to radiation, it'll actually kill off fungi and bacteria, and it will prevent those peaches from spoiling prematurely, right? And make them last longer. So, I mean, when you eat them, you wouldn't, the radiation has gone away. So it's not like you're going to be ingesting that radiation. What about this here? I actually have the notes in here. So so this is obviously showing you a PET scan of the brain. This is showing you a scan of the thyroid gland. So instead of radioactively labeling glucose, you can radioactively label like thyroid hormone to target, it's not actually thyroid hormone, but it's a precursor to making thyroid hormone. But you can actually radio label that and actually radio label iodine. And it will go specifically to the thyroid gland, and then you can image the thyroid, right? Because that molecule is specific to the function of the thyroid. So similar, this is kind of similar. It's just that it's a different type of labeled molecule, I guess. All right, so let's see what else we got. Oh, so this is the big thing in chapter 2. There's a lot of talk about water. Hopefully you guys listen to the recorded lecture. If you haven't, you better. So there's a lot of time spent on water. Okay. So why do we care so much about water in biology? So
without water, life wouldn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, life is dependent on water. Correct. If you think about like, the percentage of of the body that's made up of water, it's really high. In fact, well, I don't know why I don't know a number that I put in there somewhere, but anyway, even the percentage of water inside your cells, super high, right? So it's necessary, right? Without water, life would not be possible. Okay. So let's look at that next question. So part of what makes water so useful to living organisms is kind of inherent in its sort of chemical nature, right? And the fact that it's a polar molecule. So I said, explain why water is a polar molecule, right? Like what does it mean to be a polar molecule, I guess? So if you think about water specifically, how did you sort of explain that?
I said because it makes, I'm gonna just try and see if I got it correct. I said it makes hydrogen bonding, which has a positive and negative atoms to it.
Okay, yeah, you're on the right track, right? So when we say it's polar, what polar just means is that it's different on one part of the molecule than the other. And so particularly if you look at the water molecule, right? the oxygen kind of sticks out at the top and then the hydrogens kind of hang to the bottom. The oxygen has a partial negative charge and the hydrogens have a partial positive charge. And then you're right, that enables it to form hydrogen bonds, right? And so hydrogen bonds with itself, but also hydrogen bonds with other molecules that might have a charge or a partial charge. And so that's why it makes it a really good solvent, right? And so we talked about, or I talked about, all these different properties of water that are really based on the fact that it's a polar molecule, okay? So just the part of being polar really is just what's pictured here, that it's different in one part of the molecule than the other. It's not, so I guess, let me just show you one thing before we end. If you look at molecules like this, right? You can see here that these are completely equal. There's no polarity in this molecule, okay? As opposed to looking at water here, and I think I have another picture where it might show it even more clearly here, right? Okay, this is a polar molecule. So important really to understand a lot of those sort of properties of water that I went through, but remember that all of those properties that I discussed are really based on the fact that water is a polar molecule and based on its structure, and then therefore its ability to form hydrogen bonds, okay? If it didn't have this structure and wasn't polar, all of those properties that we talked about or that I talked about wouldn't be possible. Let me just see. Okay, so yeah, so it says, what does the polarity and the shape of the water have to do with its ability to form hydrogen bonds? So I kind of just explained that. I don't know if somebody else want to kind of chime in, because we just have one more question to go over and then we'll be done. How'd you explain that or answer that?
I've put down that that the polarity in the shape helps to regulate temperatures from keeping it from freezing over.
All right, but specifically, I'm asking you right about the hydrogen bonds. So,
Can I?
go ahead.
So,
Who's speaking?
Oh man.
Oh.
Who's that?
Okay. It's me, Moses.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
Are you answering, or Vanessa, you want to answer?
oh,
Vanessa, go first.
oh no, he can go. I already answered. That's why I said if you wanted to add more. But if you wanted to answer, then it was okay. If you wanted to add.
Moses, you want to add something?
I mean, relating to its polarity, I said the ability for how it forms hydrogen bonds. I said oxygen molecules shares electrons with two hydrogen atoms, and these hydrogen atoms are less electronegative than the oxygen atoms. So therefore, their bonds are polar.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And the idea though is that because of those polar bonds, it creates that partial, it's that charge that's created, right? It creates this partial negative charge and this partial positive charge, right? So we say electronegative. And then that's what gives it its ability to form the hydrogen bonds. It's about that charge that is created, the partial charge, because of the polarity and those polar bonds. Right, exactly. All right, so let's just get through the last question before we end. So I said contrast atomic number and mass number. That's super straightforward, right? What's the difference between atomic number and mass number?
Okay. I'll go again, but I wanna let somebody else go.
Go ahead, somebody else.
The atomic number presents the number of protons in an atom, and the mass number presents the total number of protons and neutrons in an atom.
Correct. Right, and so remember again, when you look at the periodic table and you look at any given element here, right? Mass number or atomic mass, and this is atomic number. Atomic number is what? The number of protons, right? And so as long as you know mass number and atomic number, you can then determine the number of neutrons from that, right? Because remember, atomic mass is protons plus neutrons. All right, so we're gonna end there, guys. Remember, the one thing that I guess we didn't review that much, sort of again, was the concept of valence shell, right? And the number of electrons. So, atomic mass, atomic number, we're talking about protons and neutrons. Electrons are not considered in the atomic mass because their mass is negligible. However, electrons are extremely important in influencing how the atoms behave chemically, right? What other atoms they're going to form bonds with, what type of bonds they're going to form. Okay, so when we think about like in biology, we are actually pretty concerned about the number of electrons, and particularly the number of electrons a given atom has in its outermost or valence shell, right? They're always trying to fill that valence shell. Okay, so when you talk about carbon, it has 4 electrons in the valence shell. What number is it trying to get to? What's a full valence shell?
7 or 8.
8.
8.
Right? Okay, with the exception of when you're talking about that first valence shell, it's full at 2. But otherwise, we call that the octet rule. We're always trying to get to 8. And so any atom that has less than 8 is looking to obtain some more electrons by bonding with another atom, right? Okay, so I'll kind of leave you with that. You know, again, I explain all that in the recorded lecture. If you feel like you need a little more on that, go back and listen to it again, right? The other thing, just 1 second, just before we leave, I wanted to show you the that review sheet that somebody had asked about. So the review sheets that are posted, some of them are kind of combined, a couple chapters together, some aren't. But if you look at here, like chapter 2 review sheet, all that is a scan or a PDF of the summary of the chapter, which again, I think is pretty helpful. And then some practice questions, okay? Practice multiple choice questions. The answers to those questions are in the back of the book. But if you're doing them and you don't have the book and you're curious about the answers, bring it up in class and then we can go over them. Like I said, if we had enough time, I probably would have went over these too as another method of review. If you're going to group tutoring tonight and you feel like you did everything already, pull these up and go over these questions with Katie, okay? All right, guys, if you're in lab 2 o'clock, so that's in like 10 minutes, log on to the lab meeting, okay? If you have any other questions, I'll stay on for a few minutes, but otherwise I'll see everyone again, either at 2 o'clock today or then on Tuesday at 12:30.
Bye.
Bye, thanks guys.
Professor, I have a question.
Bye, thank you.
Bye. Who, Moses, you got a question?
Yeah. So, so relating to the situation that I hear going through, how is it gonna be tackled? I mean, would we, because since we started the lab today, would we firstly go with the 2:30 and leave by any chance?
Well, because this is for virtually just come on at 2 o'clock. Usually, I'm just going to be introducing the lab, right? So like we were done by 2:30 yesterday.
Oh, okay.
So whenever you guys have to log off, just log off. And again, it's just a quick introduction to metric conversion. So you may like only need 10 minutes of it and you can log off as long as you know what the assignment is. Okay. If there's something that's going to take longer and you feel like you're going to need more, then we can just be like, all right, we'll meet back again, maybe after your class or something like that day, or, you know, the next day or something like that. Okay. But for
Thank you very much.
right now. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Miss Comiskey, for the quiz for next week, it's open notes, right? Like we can use our notes, you said?
You're not really going to be able to use your notes because, I mean, you technically can, but you're only going to have 10 minutes to complete it. So you don't really have a lot of time to look up answers, put it that way. But yeah, technically your notes can be open. Yep.
Gotcha.
I have a question, Professor.
Mm-hmm.
So for the lab, because I was type confused when I was doing it last night, we only have to do the problems on the bottom, right? Nothing on the top?
I'll show you. No, there's only, I think those ones on the top. What do you mean the bottom? The second page here, I'll show you right now.
Yeah, the second page, because it says practice meter conversions. That's the only thing we got to do, right?
Yeah, the only thing you have to do is this. You have to.
Okay.
Yep, that's it.
Because I was confused because I saw the top. I didn't know if we had to do the top as well.
No, the top.
Or it was just an explanation.
No, it's just an explanation, really.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
You said I should stay after class about that email.
Oh, yeah, who's that?
Me, Alex.
Oh, Yeah, let's wait until everyone else logs off. I wanted just to ask you about the accommodation form.
Okay.
I always like to talk to you guys to find out exactly what you need or whatever. Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I just have a question about lab.
Yeah.
Like, what should we bring to lab on Tuesday? Like, what do you want us to get? Like, do you want us to print anything out, or do we just go on like?
No. What do you mean Tuesday? When you come live, you're saying? Or
Yeah, for lab on Tuesday when we come in live.
yeah, not next week. It's gonna be the week after.
Okay, so we're just showing up on Tuesday?
Pretty much. If there's anything that you need, I'll let you guys know that ahead of time. But you're gonna really be completing that lab already online. And
Okay.
then you're gonna be coming in, and I'll have everything that you need there.
And the location of that hasn't changed? It's still what's on self-service?
Yep, HH 113 for lab. Yep.
Have a great weekend. See you on Tuesday.
Take care.
So when we have Tuesday lab, we have the lecture portion. Are we still doing the lecture portion online?
Yes, correct. Yeah, like I said, moving forward, or it could be that I end up being in that day. I'll let you guys know. I'm gonna have to be in anyway, so but my plan really is to try to just keep the lecture portion virtually on Tuesday and then live on Thursday. But yeah, so yes, we'll keep even if you're on campus, then just you could always go into the classroom or whatever. You'll know at that point where our classroom is. You could even go into the classroom and log in there or whatever if you want to come to campus during, before lab or whatever. I'll let you guys know, because it may be that we add that as an in-person day, but for right now, Tuesday lecture will be virtual, and then Thursday lecture will be live in person. Okay.
Also, did you find out about that? Did you have a chance to find out about the portfolio?
Oh, what was I supposed to find out? No, about the those I thought it was about the what the heck did they call those? About getting credits for working, no?
Or yeah, for like life experience or work experience.
Thanks for reminding me. I'll ask about that.
Okay.
I didn't, but I will. All right.
Okie dokie.
Got it.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome. Bye. Anyone else have questions? If you don't have any other questions, you guys can log off.
I do.
Go ahead, Hira.
I wanted to ask, I emailed you as well, and I also sent a chat privately. I thought I submitted the homework for 1 and 2, but it seems like it didn't go through. I think it's from my end, I have to do it twice.
Okay.
It asked me to previously I should have took a note of that, because when I submitted the homework for my